Let's talk about North Carolina. The Tar Heels made it back to the NCAA tournament last year after missing it the year before. The Heels right now playing one of the toughest schedules in America, 9-6 overall, 2-1 in the ACC. They've won their last two games, including that unbelievable, improbable game at Notre Dame on Saturday with a 4-point play by the aforementioned Elliot Cadeau. Carolina 1-6, though, in the quad one games. You can play a tough schedule, but Kerry, don't you have to win the games too?
Yeah, I mean, the schedule kind of dictates itself depending on what those schools do after you schedule them. I remember being at a mid-major school trying to get by games. You can appreciate this, Mike. Calipari was always a guy who thought he had everything figured out before everyone figured it out. And I said, well, we'll play you and you pay us a base fee of 75 grand. And then let's go to the RPI. At the time it was RPI. And if we're in the top 150, tack on another 25. If we're in the top 100, tack on another 25. We're in the top 50, double it, because all we're doing is helping you out. So I really thought that that dynamic pricing model was something that would have taken, and it might actually happen now. But to your point, Mike, all those rankings kind of sort themselves out based on who's winning the games. It's like this whole data analytics era that we're in right now. Like, you can run all your decisions based on analytics, but the reason why the analytics are what they are is because the decisions you're making are already the right decisions to justify it's like the Spider-Man meme. They're pointing at each other. So yeah, I mean, you if you're Carolina, your margin of error is shrinking, and you can't you're dang lucky you won that game. And again, road games always carry a little bit of weight. But that was an unbelievable win at Notre Dame. I mean, basically just stole it. And to be honest with you, one more second, and we're talking about a different outcome. It was pretty close that they still almost gave it up in the end. But that could be something that could springboard them into a run where they need to be Carolina. We talked about this last week. Their lack of a big, they're kind of the same across the board. RJ is struggling because he doesn't have that big to kind of defend him and or protect him. It's not defend him, but protect him and be somebody to take some pressure off of him. And you still have a lot of younger guys. Ian Jackson, obviously, we talked about Cadeau. These are still younger guys trying to find their way. Talented players in their own right, but it's a different time there right now, and they're all trying to make that adjustment and going on the heels, no pun intended, of where they've been and where they're expected to be. This is obviously a precarious time, and they have to start winning some games. They don't have it, and they have about a little margin for error, as we talked about before with Wake, but in a different way. They could find themselves in that proverbial we should be in the tournament spot at the end of the year too, which is what you don't want to be in. You either want to be in or you just want to be out so you can figure it out and start working on it next year.
My take with Carolina begins with this. If the Tar Heels had scheduled four cupcakes instead of at Kansas, Auburn, Alabama, and Florida, which I believe those four opponents might be among the dozen best teams in America. I don't think that's an exaggeration. If the Tar Heels had four cupcakes instead of those four, they'd be 13-2, and most of this conversation would be right out the door. P.S. to that, Hubert Davis is under fire from a lot of people. I would just say this in his defense. My attorney background always leads me to look at evidence. I know Hubert Davis. I knew I was 21 when he was probably 19, so I go back that far personally with Hubert Davis. I have an affection for him, a respect for him. But if the evidence didn't suggest he was a good coach, I would not be afraid to say that out loud. But what we know about the evidence is the guy's already taken the Tar Heels to a national championship game. What we know about the evidence is the guy's already taken the Tar Heels to two huge wins over maybe the greatest of all time, Mike Krzyzewski, at the end of Coach K's career when Coach K had really good teams. You can't be a bad coach and do those things. You can't. And if you're a bad coach, you don't win an ACC regular season. Remember, Hubert Davis already has a regular season title. Now, I'm not saying the guy doesn't deserve hard questions and some criticism. Should the Heels be better? Should the chemistry be better? Should you ever get caught at the University of North Carolina without a high caliber big man? No. He has the answer for that. That is a fair criticism. Literally for a half century. This is not an exaggeration. I have the data to back it up. There's never been in 50 years a Carolina team without a big man who could average double digits scoring. Never. That is The word never is misused widely. Never in a half century, I'll say, not like since the 1800s. Never in a half, since the Dean Smith era started, let's say, in the 1960s. Carolina's never had a roster without a high caliber big man, and it just doesn't have it this year. And that's messing up the chemistry in ways that Coach Keating could talk about how it's less complicated to prepare for the Tar Heels. It's easier to defend R.J. Davis without getting, the snot beat out of you because you put too much pressure on the perimeter, and Baycott ends up with 30 and 18 because you extended your defense. But, everything is different when it comes to those X's and O's this year. R.J. Davis didn't forget how to be a good basketball player, right? Like the guy shot roughly 40% from three-point land last year. There's a lot of reasons for that. RJ's the same guy, but the chemistry around him is different. The personnel around him is different. The inside-outside balance is insanely different. And the Tar Heels are going to be walking that fine line that Coach was just talking about, rather than just beating the brains out of some of their opponents. They stole a win at Notre Dame, right? But I think when you have, put it this way, if it was playground style, and all three of us got to just look at all the players in the ACC and just start picking dudes, eventually, pretty quickly, Seth Trimble, R.J. Davis, Elliot Cadeau, Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, they're going to be picked early. However, there's no center in that five. There's no power forward in that five. And that makes building a modern-day functional team rather than a playground team a lot more complicated.
And there it is, because I've been waiting to say this for a while. I wanted to get to the Carolina section. But in our opening segment of Time Out today, Kerry came back and was talking about how Duke is set up off the court and how they brought in people with a strong basketball background, with an NBA mindset, and they are using their resources in a smart, efficient, and proactive way. Wake Forest hasn't done that. NC State hasn't done that. And it's almost negligent how North Carolina's staff is it's all predicated on where they went to school. So that closes out a lot of talent right there, and a lot of, myopic thinking, to go back again to week one with you, Kerry, and what you talked about the Carolina program. But if you're not set up to do what you need to do, it's going to be a challenge. And this personnel issue with the lack of a big, Carolina also, and this will be, there are very few people that will believe me, but believe me when I tell you, I know this to be the truth. North Carolina basketball is excessively efficient. That's another way of saying they're cheap. They've always been cheap. They've been very slow to engage into new ways of thinking and doing things, new technologies, this and that and the other. And it just feels like when I watch that program off the court, on the court, they are in a sclerotic state. Hubert Davis is not a prototypical head coach. He is a very good coach, but he's not the guy that you would say, man, that's the guy that should be the head coach of one of the top 5 programs in the nation. He would not have gotten a job at Kentucky or Duke or a UCLA or any of those other big programs. He got the job because he was a Carolina guy. You wonder now, what with all of the Carolina guys, Kerry, you've worked with them. David, you've known them for 40 years. Why the incredible depth of talent of basketball minds around North Carolina basketball alumni are not more directly involved on a daily basis? And if they are, they're not telling anybody about it. And I think that would be very attractive when you're trying to get some of those guys in the portal. Hey, if you're a big, come get mentored by Rasheed Wallace. I love Rasheed Wallace. I remember Dean Smith saying during a commercial break one time during his Carolina Blue Line show, David, that Rasheed Wallace and Anton Jameson were the best 2 players that he ever coached that were bigs. And that's a hell of a statement from Dean Smith. But they were also great guys. Why are they not around the program? Instead, I've got Sean May, who is not a big guy. He's a big guy. But that is not the guy that you want teaching your post players. And right now, there is no Bill Guthridge walking through that door, the big man whisperer. I don't know. I
So,
mean, that to
so
me
Mike,
is a real challenge for them.
let me throw the coaching hat on here, and David mentioned this too, and I think there's parallels here. Hubert made it a point to make some tweaks to how they play. David's point, never. Well, here's the never. Along with the never, they've never not run basic series, which I'll rudimentally explain without a whiteboard yet. Maybe we'll have to add that feature for future. And they've never not run secondary break. The reason why the bigs worked at Carolina is because every time they came down the floor, without hesitation, no matter what they were doing, the ball would get reversed through the top of the key, through the trailing big, and the first thing you do would look into the other big who ran to the rim first. That's efficiency at its finest. Then when the ball got reversed, that ball side guard, not the point guard, would be following that big as he went across the lane, set a back screen on the other big to go to the rim, and they get lob dunks. Now you have the athleticism of the Antoine Jamesons and the Rasheed Wallace. Like, oh my God, towering alley-oop dunks coming most likely from a 6'6" man who could see over the top of that and deliver that pass. If that didn't happen, the guard steps out, and now the two bigs engage in screens with each other, and it's unstoppable. One of those two guys is getting a duck in, and now you have, and this was the beauty, Mike, you mentioned working for a Carolina guy. I'll never forget one of my favorite times of coaching when I was with Buzz Peterson, Carolina grad, of course. We ran Carolina system. That's what Buzz knew. He wasn't screwing that up. He won at App State, won at Tulsa. I'm in the Garden, my home joint, playing Alabama in the finals of the NIT, and we're running secondary, and he's letting me kind of toy with this, and I'm on the bench, and I'm like, hey, who wants to run a new set in secondary? We had all our Roy Williams stuff for Paul Pierce. We had like 15 derivatives out of secondary break. We had good big guys at those places, right? So you go to Carolina now, the adjustment that they made, yeah, we can go through all the other things, the ancillary things in the portal and transfers. But there's no place right now for what they're doing. And the basic series was, okay, now we're in half court. We're going to be in a box set. The two bigs are going to be up high. We're going to pop them out where they can get catches because no one's going to pressure them out there. And then we're going to have some exchange opposite that's going to result in one of the guards, as the ball gets reversed, back screening for the initial big to cut to the basket. And the first look, go inside. Well, here's where the guards benefit. The other big now becomes a screener. There are no screeners on Carolina's team right now. There's athletes, there's slashers, there's cutters, there's scorers. Yeah, you can have a big that can space the floor a la the Warriors in the post, not to post somebody up, but throw the ball in there for spacing purposes, which is an unheralded thing now. No one does that anymore, but it's successful. Or you can use those guys as screeners. No one's going to get recruited out of the portal to come be a screener at Carolina. I don't care how much you're paying me. I'll give you $1 million to be the 5-man at Carolina and set screens for R.J. Davis and Elliot Cadeau this year. I'll sign me up for that. I'll do it. I appreciate that. But these kids don't get that. And there's the chasm that's starting to come. Coach Smith, rest in peace. Coach Williams is around at the games. His name's on the court. People know him. But now, what year is this with Hubert now? I mean, is it 4 or 5? Like now we're starting. Okay, now this is. I wonder, David, if you can't do it in the middle of the season because you don't have the personnel. If their off season is, okay, we tried this. We had a few. I remember going to the practice early on. They had a transfer from Marquette.
Dawson Garcia.
And I'm telling you right now, every other word out of Hubert's mouth. Yeah, Dawson. Yeah, Dawson. Yeah, Dawson. It was, and I'm like, this guy must be like exactly. Never saw him on the court. I don't even know if he finished that year he was there. Like he didn't. Ghost. If you went to practice in October, which I did, you'd think, oh, this is the guy. Now Manic became that guy for them the next year, and obviously the run happened when you had Love and you have RJ and you have Baycott. You got pieces. I wonder if they actually don't say, okay, we tried it, and while we still can, because it's not going to be a house cleaning necessarily, either from the top or internally. And I don't know, Mike, if they'll look. I'll self-promote shamelessly here. I'm as much of a Carolina guy as anybody, but I didn't go to school at Carolina. But I can tell you right now, you drop me in that office right now, I know exactly what they're talking about and everything that they're talking about, having spent all that time with Buzz and carrying a photo of what I did. If they don't go back to, we really need to go get 1 or 2 really good bigs. If you're asking me, Here's my consulting plan for Carolina. Go find and develop prep school or reclassified or a good high school big or two. Sell them on being the next Baycott, only in the sense of being here for 4 5 years, maybe 6. I'll tell you where Carolina can benefit. Develop a relationship what's coming up with a junior college or community college. Put some of these kids in there for 2 years, get them back for 4 years, and watch what happens to that kid when he's the big kid at Carolina 6 years from now as a 24-year-old, getting paid, having all of his expenses done, and a local homegrown, whether it's regional or state. If you ask me, that guy is there somewhere. And you got to really have a vision to sell him on that. And I got news for you. By the time that happens in 6 years, someone in the NBA, in the cyclical nature of how basketball works, will eventually go back to realizing we need to have a big guy in our program again, and that'll be a spot for them in the first or second round of the draft. Basketball has always worked that way. It may sound easy for me because I'm not worried about wins or losses, but I feel like you have a pretty decent handle on seeing this and where it's gone. And you've got guys that respect that and understand that. There's not a guy on that staff that doesn't know what secondary break or B1 or B2 or B3 is. Not a single one. They know what T game is against the zone. They know it. There's a reason why Coach Smith and Coach Williams did what they did. Sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You took a shot. You got really good shot. National championship, Final Four. Maybe it's time to go back. Maybe. I don't know. I'll be really, really interested to see how their offseason goes.
Mike, real quick, you asked that great broad question, and it's one of your favorites about Carolina's reluctance to look at that broader horizon, non-Carolina people, different ways of looking at things. We don't have enough time to dive all the way into that rabbit hole today, but I'll just say this quickly. On the upside, amidst some sky is falling conversations about the Tar Heels, you also have to give Hubert Davis and his staff credit for finding, signing, and developing Ian Jackson and Drake Powell.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So if you're making a list of what you think might be wrong with Carolina basketball, in air quotes, let's not be blind to the fact that literally every program in America would love to make a habit of having two guys like that in their freshman class on a consistent basis. So let's give them credit for that. The other point, just to follow on what Coach said, you have to treat, if you like to play basketball the way North Carolina likes to play basketball, you simply must treat the transfer portal the way football coaches now treat the position of quarterback. Mm-hmm. There is nobody who goes into a new college football season without a starting quarterback that they believe can take them where they want to go. If it makes Hubert uncomfortable to incorporate name, image, likeness money to find that big man, he's got to get over himself. He's got to get over the idea that the world should still work the way it did when Dean Smith recruited him in the 1980s. Like, those days are over. And just like you will get fired in college football, if you do not every single year make sure you have a quarterback you trust and a backup you can live with at that most important position on the football field, if you want to play the way Carolina plays, others can get away without an elite big man. Carolina can't, unless they even more dramatically change the Carolina way than Coach just outlined earlier, the things that they don't do as much of or at all anymore. It is drowning this season, the lack of that quarterback type presence in the post. And that's just something that Hubert Davis and his staff, great or bad or in between, you can't solve personnel issues at midseason. This is not the NBA. You got what you got. And that means a lot of talent in the backcourt, maybe as much as almost anybody in America. I still think the Heels are going to finish in the top 3 or 4 of the standings in the ACC. I still think they're going to be an NCAA tournament team, but they're going to be riding that roller coaster because of that donut in the post.
Kerry, do you think the Heels make the postseason? NCAA?
I do. I think on top of what David said, they're good enough and talented enough at spots in the bigger scheme of things to make it. Where that lands them in terms of favorable seeding, you never really know. But obviously, given the overriding factor of what's happening in the region, it's going to be tough to get into that top 4 seeding anyway. I think they'll be happy to do that. And, you have good guards and shots can go in. They can make a little bit of a run, maybe win 2, find themselves in the second weekend. But yeah, I think we'll eventually find the Tar Heels in postseason this year.